In a universe where empires span thousands of worlds and species measure their worth in conquered systems, humanity was still learning to crawl among the stars. They had no grand fleets, no ancient lineages, no genetic superiority. What they had was something far stranger, something that would make an empress abandon her throne and walk barefoot through alien streets just to understand it. They called it kindness without reason. They called it helping a stranger. And when one human offered his last meal to a dying woman in an alley, he set in motion events that would shake the foundations of galactic power itself. Because that woman was no beggar. She was Caliph Voss, eternal empress of the Zirathi Dominion, ruler of 400 billion souls across 12,000 worlds. And she had just discovered something more valuable than all the treasures in her vaults combined. A species that gave without counting the cost, that helped without demanding tribute, that showed mercy to those they believed powerless. In 7 cycles, she would return to that dirty alley on that forgettable human colony. But she would not return as a beggar. She would return as herself. And the young man who had shared his food with a stranger would learn that sometimes the smallest acts of humanity echo across the stars louder than any warship's guns. This is not a story about humanity conquering the galaxy. This is a story about how humanity conquered something far more difficult. The heart of someone who had forgotten what it meant to be seen as simply alive, rather than powerful. Marcus Chun had exactly 43 credits left to his name, and he was trying to decide whether to spend them on food or the medicine his neighbor needed for her daughter. The decision should have been easy. Mrs. Yamada's little girl had been coughing for 3 days straight, the kind of wet, rattling cough that kept everyone in their section of the habitat awake at night. But Marcus hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and his stomach was making its displeasure known with sounds that could probably be heard in the next compartment. The rain hammered down on the transparent dome overhead, creating a constant drumming that echoed through the narrow streets of New Providence. It wasn't real rain, of course. Nothing on this colony was entirely real. The water was recycled, filtered through systems older than Marcus himself, and sprayed back into the artificial atmosphere to create the illusion of weather. The administrators said it was good for morale. Marcus thought it was just another way to remind them all that they were living in a tin can at the edge of explored space, where even the sky was manufactured. He pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders and quickened his pace. The market district would be closing soon, and if he was going to make a decision about those 43 credits, he needed to do it before the vendors packed up their stalls. New Providence wasn't the kind of place where opportunities came twice. The colony had been established 32 years ago as a way station for ships traveling the outer routes. It was meant to be temporary, a stepping stone to richer worlds deeper in human-controlled space. But, like so many human endeavors in this part of the galaxy, it had gotten stuck in the awkward phase between temporary and permanent. Now it housed about 50,000 people who couldn't afford to leave and couldn't quite figure out how to make staying work either. Marcus was one of them. He'd been born here, in the medical wing that doubled as a morgue when the population dipped. His parents had been contracted workers for Horizon Logistics, moving cargo between ships and stations. They died when he was 14, caught in an explosive decompression when a docking seal failed. The company had paid out exactly the minimum required by law, which was enough to keep him fed for about 6 months if he was careful. He'd been careful, and when the money ran out, he'd learned to be useful. Now he worked maintenance on the lower levels, crawling through access tunnels to repair water lines and air recyclers. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay well, but it kept him alive. Mostly, the market district occupied a converted cargo bay in the colony's commercial sector. Vendors set up their stalls beneath flickering lights that hummed with the constant threat of failure. Everything here was secondhand or salvaged or synthesized from base materials by machines that probably should have been retired a decade ago. Fresh food was a luxury. Most people ate protein paste flavored with whatever chemical tricks made it vaguely resemble real meat. Marcus navigated through the crowd with practiced ease. He knew most of the vendors by sight, had learned which ones would give him a fair price, and which ones would try to cheat him just because he was young and alone. Old Man Kowalski ran a stall near the back that sold medical supplies, mostly expired but still functional. That's where the medicine for Mrs. Yamada's daughter would come from, assuming Kowalski was feeling generous with his prices today. He was halfway to Kowalski's stall when he saw her. She was lying in an alley between two storage units, curled up on her side with her back against the corrugated metal wall. At first, Marcus thought she might be dead. She wasn't moving, and her skin had that grayish tint that people got when they'd been without proper food or medical care for too long. But as he got closer, he could see the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Not dead. Not yet. Marcus stopped, his hand already reaching for the pocket where he kept his credits. This was none of his business. The colony had shelters for people who couldn't take care of themselves. It had medical services, underfunded and overwhelmed, but still functional. If this woman needed help, there were official channels for that. Official channels that didn't require him to get involved or spend his 43 credits. He started to walk away, made it about 3 steps before he stopped again. The thing was, Marcus had been hungry before. Really hungry. The kind of hungry that made you lightheaded and desperate. He knew what it felt like to wonder if today was the day your body just gave up. And he knew that official channels had a way of moving slowly when you needed them most. By the time the shelters got around to checking on someone in an alley, that someone might not be breathing anymore. He turned around and walked back to the woman, knelt down beside her, close enough to see that she wasn't human. Not entirely, anyway. Her skin had a faint pattern to it, almost like scales, but not quite. Her hair was darker than black, the kind of color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And her eyes, when they fluttered open to look at him, were gold. Bright, metallic gold, like coins catching sunlight. She stared at him for a moment, and he stared back, trying to figure out what species she might be. There were dozens of alien races that visited New Providence, traders and travelers passing through on their way to more important places. Some of them looked almost human. Some of them didn't. This woman fell somewhere in the middle. "Hey," Marcus said, keeping his voice gentle. "Are you okay? Can you understand me?" The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out. She swallowed, tried again. "Hungry," she whispered. The word came out in accented standard, rough, but comprehensible. "Please. So hungry." Marcus felt his stomach clench, not from his own hunger, but from the raw desperation in her voice. He'd heard that tone before, in his own voice, back when his parents had first died, and he'd been learning what it meant to be alone in a place that didn't care whether you lived or died. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I'm going to help you. Can you stand?" She shook her head. The movement seemed to cost her enormous effort. Marcus looked around. The alley was empty except for the two of them. The market crowd was visible at the end of the passage, but no one was paying attention to a man and a dying alien tucked between storage units. He could leave. Go buy the medicine for Mrs. Yamada's daughter, like he'd planned. Let someone else deal with this situation. Instead, he made a decision that would change everything. "Stay here," he said. "I'm going to get you some food." The woman's gold eyes widened slightly. "You will help." "Yeah," Marcus said. "I'll help." He stood up and walked back toward the market, his mind already calculating. He had 43 credits. A single meal from the food stalls cost around 15 credits if you went for something basic. That would leave 28 credits for medicine, which might not be enough depending on what Kowalski had in stock and what kind of mood he was in. Or he could spend 30 credits on enough food to actually fill someone up, the kind of meal that would give a starving person a real chance at recovery. That would leave 13 credits. Definitely not enough for medicine. The decision should have been hard. Should have required careful thought and moral calculation. But Marcus found that it wasn't hard at all. He looked at the food stalls, picked the one that gave the most generous portions, and ordered a full meal. Rice, synthesized chicken, vegetables that had probably never seen real soil. It cost 31 credits. He walked back to the alley with the container still warm in his hands. The woman hadn't moved. For a terrible moment, he thought she might have died while he was gone. But then, her eyes opened again, tracking his movement as he knelt beside her. "Here," Marcus said, opening the container. Steam rose from the food, carrying the smell of spices and protein. "Eat slowly, okay? If you've been starving, your stomach won't handle too much at once." The woman stared at the food like it was the most precious thing she'd ever seen. Her hands shook as she reached for the container. Marcus helped her sit up, supporting her weight as she leaned against the wall. She was lighter than he'd expected, her body all sharp angles under her ragged clothes. She took a bite. Then another. For a few minutes, the only sound in the alley was the quiet scrape of her eating. Marcus watched, making sure she didn't choke or make herself sick. When she'd eaten about half the container, he gently took it away. "Give your stomach a chance to adjust," he said. "You can have more in a few minutes." The woman nodded. Some color had returned to her face, though she still looked like she'd been through hell. She looked at Marcus with those strange gold eyes, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why help me? You do not know me. I am not your kind. I have nothing to offer you." Marcus shrugged. "You were hungry. I had credits." Seemed pretty straightforward. Most beings do not think this way. "Maybe most beings haven't been hungry before," Marcus said. "I have. I know what it feels like. Wouldn't wish it on anyone." The woman was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "What is your name?" "Marcus Chun." "You." She hesitated. "Kale," she said finally. "My name is Kale." "Okay, Kale. Do you have somewhere to go? Friends, family, a ship?" "No," she said. "I am alone." Marcus nodded. That, at least, was something he understood. "There are shelters in the administrative sector. I can help you get there once you're feeling stronger. They'll give you a bed and meals until you figure out your next move." "You would do this? Even after already helping me?" "It's not a big deal," Marcus said, though that wasn't entirely true. He'd just spent most of his money on a stranger, and now he was offering to walk her across the colony to a shelter, which would eat up time he should be spending on work. But saying it out loud would make it seem like he expected something in return, and he didn't. He was just doing what seemed right. Kale looked at him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it transformed her face. For just a second, she didn't look like a dying woman in an alley. She looked like someone important, someone who carried weight in the world. "You are a strange creature, Marcus Chun," she said. "Your species is strange. I think I would like to understand you better." "Not much to understand," Marcus said. "I'm just a maintenance worker trying to get by. Same as everyone else here." "No," Kale said quietly. "Not same. Different. Very different." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, a cough from deeper in the alley made him turn. A maintenance bot was trundling toward them, its sensors blinking as it scanned for whatever malfunction had triggered its patrol route. Marcus helped Kale to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved out of the bot's way. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you somewhere safer. You can finish eating, and then we'll figure out the shelter situation." They walked slowly through the market district, Marcus adjusting his pace to match Kale's weakened state. People glanced at them and looked away, just another pair of unfortunates in a colony full of them. No one offered to help. No one asked if they needed assistance. That was life on New Providence. You looked after yourself because no one else would. Except Marcus had looked after someone else. And he couldn't quite explain why, even to himself. They made it to a public rest area, one of the small parks that the colony maintained to give people the illusion of open space. Synthetic grass crunched under their feet as Marcus guided Kale to a bench beneath an artificial tree. He gave her the rest of the food and watched as she ate more slowly this time, with more control. "You said you're alone," Marcus said after a while. "How did you end up in that alley?" Kale was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice was careful. "I was traveling. There was an incident. I became separated from my companions. By the time I reached this colony, I had no resources, no way to contact anyone who could help. I thought I would die in that alley." "But you didn't," Marcus said. "And now you won't. The shelter will help you get in touch with your people, whoever they are. You'll be okay." "Yes," Kale said softly. "I believe I will. Because of you." Something in her tone made Marcus uncomfortable. It was too formal, too weighted, like she was saying more than her words implied. He stood up, suddenly, awkward. "I should go," he said. "I've got work in a few hours, and I need to figure out some stuff before then. Will you be okay if I leave you here? The shelter is just 2 sectors over. You can ask anyone for directions." Kale stood as well, moving with more strength now that she had food in her system. She was taller than Marcus had realized, almost as tall as him. And there was something about the way she held herself now, a kind of dignity that hadn't been there when she was lying in the alley. "I will remember this, Marcus Chun," she said. "I will remember your kindness. And I swear to you, on powers you do not understand, that this debt will be repaid. It's not a debt, Marcus said quickly. I don't want anything back. I just helped because it was the right thing to do. I know, Kale said. That is why the debt is sacred. Before Marcus could respond, she did something unexpected. She reached out and touched his forehead with 2 fingers, a gesture that felt ceremonial somehow. Her skin was warm, warmer than human skin, and for just a second Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation, like static electricity. Then, she stepped back, and the moment was over. Go, she said. Do what you must do. But, know that we will meet again, Marcus Chun. This is not the end of our story. Marcus wanted to say that there was no story, that this was just a random act of kindness that wouldn't mean anything tomorrow. But, something about the way Kale looked at him, with those bright gold eyes full of certainty, made him keep quiet. He nodded once, then turned and walked away. He didn't look back. If he had, he might have seen the way Kale watched him go, her expression complex and unreadable. He might have noticed the faint shimmer in the air around her, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. He might have realized that the woman he'd helped wasn't quite what she seemed. But Marcus didn't look back. He had 12 credits left and a sick child's medicine to figure out. He had work to do and a life to live. The strange woman in the alley would be just another story, another small moment of connection in a lonely place. That's what he thought anyway. 7 days later, everything changed. Marcus was deep in the maintenance tunnels, replacing a corroded valve in one of the water systems when the alarm started. Not the normal alarms that went off when someone forgot to seal an airlock or when a pressure reading went slightly off. These were the big alarms, the ones that meant something serious was happening. He climbed out of the tunnel and pulled up his comm unit, checking for updates. What he saw made his stomach drop. Ships had entered New Providence's space. Lots of ships. And not just any ships. These were warships, massive vessels that made the colony's defense platforms look like children's toys. According to the emergency broadcast, they belonged to the Zirathi Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful empires in the known galaxy. And they were demanding to speak with someone named Marcus Chun. The next few hours passed in a blur. Colonial security came for him, polite, but insistent. They took him to the administrative sector, to the governor's office, where a dozen officials were trying very hard not to panic. The Zirathi had made it clear that they wanted Marcus delivered to their flagship immediately. They hadn't said why. They hadn't made threats. They'd simply stated their requirement and waited. Governor Martinez was a thin woman with gray hair and the permanently exhausted look of someone who'd been dealing with bureaucratic nightmares for too long. She looked at Marcus like he was a problem she hadn't studied for. Mr. Chun, she said, do you have any idea why the Zirathi Dominion would want to speak with you specifically? Marcus shook his head. No, ma'am. I'm just maintenance. I've never even left the colony. Have you had contact with any Zirathi citizens recently? Any interactions that might have drawn their attention? Marcus thought about it. He'd met plenty of aliens in the market district, but he couldn't remember any that had specifically identified as Zirathi. Unless the woman in the alley. Kale. Those gold eyes and dark hair. The way she'd spoken about debts and sacred oaths. There was someone, Marcus said slowly. About a week ago. A woman. She was starving. I gave her food and helped her to a shelter. She said her name was Kale. One of the officials, a security chief named Roberts, pulled up something on his datapad. His face went pale. Kale. Did she have gold eyes? Dark hair? Patterns on her skin? Yeah, Marcus said. That's her. Who is she? Roberts looked at the governor. The governor looked back. No one seemed to want to answer. Finally, Martinez spoke. Mr. Chun, the Zirathi have sent us an official communication. They're requesting your presence aboard their flagship, the Eternal Throne. They say you are to be honored as a guest of the highest importance. They've offered to compensate the colony for any inconvenience this causes. Compensate, Marcus said. What do you mean, compensate? Roberts turned his datapad around so Marcus could see the screen. The number displayed there had so many zeros that Marcus had to count them twice to believe what he was seeing. That's their opening offer, Roberts said. Just for letting you go talk to them. They've also promised trade agreements, technology transfers, and formal diplomatic relations. Mr. Chun, the Zirathi Dominion is offering to turn New Providence from a backwater colony into a major hub. And All they want in exchange is to meet with you. Marcus felt dizzy. None of this made sense. He'd helped a stranger. That was all. There was no reason for an entire empire to care about that. Unless the stranger hadn't been a stranger at all. Unless Kale had been something more than she appeared. Who is she? Marcus asked again. The woman I helped. Who is she really? The governor and Roberts exchanged another look. This time, it was Martinez who answered, her voice quiet and strained. According to the Zirathi communication, her full name is Caliph Voss. She's the eternal empress of the Zirathi Dominion. She rules over 12,000 worlds and 400 billion souls across 3 spiral arms. She's one of the most powerful individuals in the known galaxy. Marcus sat down heavily in the nearest chair. That's not possible. She was dying. She was lying in an alley with no one to help her. Apparently, she was testing something, Martinez said. The Zirathi communication mentioned something about walking among lesser species to understand their nature. Mr. Chun, you helped someone who could have destroyed this entire colony with a word. And instead of being angry that you didn't recognize her, she seems to want to thank you. This is insane, Marcus said. Yes, Martinez agreed. But it's happening. The question is, will you go? We can't force you. Technically, you're a free citizen. But I'll be honest with you, Mr. Chun. If you refuse, the Zirathi might take it as an insult. And we can't afford to insult someone with that many warships. Marcus looked around the room at all the worried faces. These people were scared. And they were right to be scared. New Providence was vulnerable, barely hanging on. If the Zirathi decided to be angry, there would be nothing anyone could do about it. But that wasn't what made up his mind. What made up his mind was remembering the woman in the alley. The way she'd looked at him with those gold eyes. The way she'd said that their story wasn't over. I'll go, Marcus said. If she wants to talk, I'll talk. But I'm not promising anything beyond that. The governor looked relieved. Thank you, Mr. Chun. A shuttle will take you to the flagship within the hour. And Mr. Chin? Try not to make her angry. Marcus wanted to laugh at that. Try not to make an empress angry. Sure. No problem. He'd just be himself, the same way he'd been himself in the alley. If that wasn't good enough, then nothing would be. An hour later, he was on a shuttle heading toward the largest ship he'd ever seen. The Eternal Throne filled his viewport, a massive construct of dark metal and glowing energy fields. It looked like something out of a myth, too big to be real. And somewhere on that ship, a woman who ruled thousands of worlds was waiting for him. A woman he'd given his last meal to, thinking she was just another lost soul in a forgotten colony. Marcus Chun, maintenance worker, was about to learn that sometimes the smallest kindness could echo across the stars. And sometimes, helping a stranger could change absolutely everything. The shuttle docked with the Eternal Throne through a hangar bay that could have held the entire residential sector of New Providence. Marcus pressed his face against the viewport, trying to comprehend the scale of what he was seeing. Rows of smaller ships lined the hangar walls, each one probably worth more than the colony's entire annual budget. Crews of aliens moved with military precision, their uniforms crisp and their movements synchronized. Everything gleamed with a kind of perfection that Marcus had never seen before, not even in the propaganda vids that showed Earth's finest cities. A Zirathi officer met him at the airlock. She was tall, easily 2 meters, with the same dark hair and gold eyes that Kale had possessed. But where Kale had seemed vulnerable and human in her hunger, this woman radiated authority. The patterns on her skin glowed faintly, pulsing with bioluminescence that reminded Marcus of deep-sea creatures from Earth's oceans. Marcus Chun, the officer said, her standard perfect and unaccented. I am Commander Thes Vorin, 3rd Shield of the Eternal Guard. The Empress has commanded your presence. Follow me, and touch nothing. Marcus nodded, suddenly, very aware of how shabby his maintenance coveralls looked compared to the gleaming corridor ahead. He followed Thes through passages that seemed to be carved from single pieces of some dark, lustrous material. Lights embedded in the walls shifted colors as they passed, responding to their movement in ways Marcus couldn't begin to understand. Occasionally, they passed other Zirathi, who stopped and pressed their fists to their chests in what Marcus guessed was a salute. None of them looked at him directly, which he found more unsettling than if they'd stared. Commander, Marcus said after they'd been walking for several minutes. Can I ask what's going to happen? Nobody really explained anything back on the colony. Thess glanced at him, her gold eyes unreadable. You will speak with the Empress. Beyond that, I cannot say. The Empress's will is her own, and I do not presume to predict it. Right, Marcus said. Helpful. Thanks. If Thess noticed his sarcasm, she didn't show it. They continued through the ship in silence, climbing through levels that Marcus couldn't keep track of. The deeper they went, the more opulent everything became. The dark walls gave way to surfaces that looked like crystallized starlight. Tapestries depicting battles and coronations hung in corridors wide enough to march armies through. And through it all, Marcus felt increasingly out of place, like a smudge of dirt on a pristine surface. Finally, they reached a set of doors that stretched from floor to ceiling. They were covered in script that Marcus couldn't read, flowing characters that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. Thess stopped and turned to face him. Beyond these doors is the throne chamber, she said. When you enter, you will walk forward until you are 10 paces from the throne. You will then kneel and lower your head until the Empress gives you permission to rise. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not look directly at the Empress unless invited to do so. You will address her as your Eternal Majesty or Empress. Do you understand? Marcus felt his stomach clench. That's a lot of rules. These are not rules, Thess said coldly. These are protocols that have been followed for 10,000 years. Species that fail to follow them tend not to be invited back. And if I mess up? Marcus asked. Try not to. The doors opened before Marcus could ask any more questions. Beyond them was a chamber so vast that Marcus couldn't see the far walls through the atmospheric haze. The floor was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the light from thousands of floating orbs that drifted through the air like captive stars. And at the center of it all, raised on a dais of black stone, was the throne. It wasn't like any throne Marcus had imagined. It didn't look like furniture. It looked alive, somehow, like it was growing out of the dais itself. Dark branches twisted upward, forming a frame around a seat that seemed to be made of condensed shadow. Energy arced between the branches, purple and white, crackling with barely contained power. And, sitting in that throne, looking like she belonged there more than anything Marcus had ever seen, was Kale. Except she wasn't Kale anymore. Or maybe she was, but she was also so much more. The woman on the throne wore robes that seemed to be woven from darkness itself, flowing and shifting as if stirred by an invisible wind. A crown of twisted metal rested on her head, studded with gems that glowed with their own internal light. Her skin patterns were fully visible now, glowing brightly enough to illuminate the space around her. She looked like power incarnate, like something out of a myth that had decided to take physical form. Marcus walked forward, his boots clicking on the polished floor. He counted his steps, trying to remember Thess's instructions. 10 paces from the throne. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look directly at her unless invited. When he reached the 10th pace, he stopped. The chamber was full of Zirathi, he realized. They lined the walls, hundreds of them, all wearing elaborate uniforms or robes. All watching him with those unnerving gold eyes. All waiting to see what would happen. Marcus had never been good at following rules he didn't understand. But he also wasn't stupid. This was clearly important to these people, and he'd already caused enough trouble just by helping someone eat. So he did what Thess had told him to do. He knelt, lowered his head, and waited. The silence stretched out. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. Could hear the faint hum of the energy arcing around the throne. Could hear absolutely nothing else. Then, Caliph spoke, and her voice filled the chamber like thunder. Rise, Marcus Chun of humanity. Rise, and look upon me. Marcus stood slowly, lifted his head, met those gold eyes that he'd last seen in an alley, filled with hunger and desperation. Now they blazed with power and authority. But, underneath it all, he thought he could still see something of the woman who'd thanked him for a simple meal. Your Eternal Majesty, Marcus said, because it seemed like the thing to say. Caliph smiled. It was a small smile, but it transformed her face the same way it had in the alley. You do not sound comfortable with that title. I'm not really comfortable with any of this, Marcus admitted. Ma'am, Your Majesty, I'm just a maintenance worker. I don't belong in a place like this. A murmur ran through the assembled Zirathi. Marcus couldn't tell if it was approval or offense, but Caliph raised one hand, and the chamber fell silent again. Tell me, Caliph said. Do you know who I am? They told me you're the Empress, Marcus said. Ruler of the Zirathi Dominion. 12,000 worlds, for 100 billion people. That you're one of the most powerful individuals in the galaxy. And does knowing this change your opinion of what happened between us? Marcus thought about it. About the woman in the alley, the desperation in her voice, the way she'd eaten like someone who'd forgotten what food tasted like. About the way she'd looked at him when he'd explained that he was helping because it was the right thing to do. No, he said. You were hungry. I had food. That part hasn't changed just because I know you're important. Another murmur, louder this time. Caliph's smile grew wider. You see, she said, addressing the room rather than Marcus. This is what I spoke of. This is the human quality that we must understand. He does not recalculate his morality based on power. He acts according to principles that exist independent of hierarchy or advantage. She turned her attention back to Marcus. I must explain something to you, Marcus Chun. And you must listen carefully, because what I tell you now will determine the shape of things to come. Okay, Marcus said, because what else could he say? Caliph leaned forward on her throne, and suddenly, the vast chamber felt intimate, like it was just the two of them talking. The Zirathi Dominion has existed for 12,000 years. We have conquered and absorbed hundreds of species. We have spread our rule across 3 spiral arms of this galaxy. We have achieved a level of power and stability that most civilizations can only dream of. And in all that time, across all those species, I have never witnessed what I witnessed in that alley. You mean someone giving away food? Marcus asked. That can't be unique. Not the act itself, Caliph said, but the reasoning behind it. Tell me, when you helped me, did you expect anything in return? No, Marcus said. Of course not. You didn't have anything to give. Did you know I was Zirathi? I figured you were some kind of alien. Couldn't tell which species exactly. Did you check to see if I was dangerous? If I might harm you once I recovered my strength? Marcus frowned. You were starving. You couldn't hurt anybody in that condition. But you did not know that I would not try. You did not run a threat assessment. You did not demand identification or proof of my intentions. You simply helped. What? Marcus felt like he was taking a test he hadn't studied for. Because you needed help. Because I'd been hungry before, and I knew what it felt like. Because leaving someone to die when I could do something about it seemed wrong. Caliph stood up from her throne. The movement was fluid, graceful, but it also made every Zirathi in the chamber stiffen to attention. She walked down the dais steps until she was standing directly in front of Marcus. Up close, he could see that she was exactly as tall as he was. Her eyes were level with his, gold meeting brown. The Zirathi conquer, she said softly. We take what we need and destroy what resists. We build hierarchies based on power and enforce them through strength. This is how we have survived. This is how we have thrived. But in 12,000 years, we have never built anything like what humans build. What do humans build? Marcus asked. Community, Caliph said. You build networks of obligation that exist outside power structures. You help strangers not because you expect reward but because you have decided that helping is valuable in itself. You create systems of mutual aid that persist even in places like your colony, where resources are scarce and life is difficult. You do this instinctively, without thought, as if it is written into your very nature. She reached out and touched his forehead with 2 fingers, the same gesture she'd made in the alley. I came to your colony in disguise because I wanted to understand. The Zirathi have been watching humanity for 3 of your generations. We have seen you spread across your local cluster despite having inferior technology. We have seen your colonies persist in conditions that would break other species. We have seen you help each other in ways that make no logical sense. And we could not understand it. So you pretended to be helpless to see what would happen, Marcus said. Yes, Caliph said. I walked through your colony for 7 days. I observed your people. I made myself vulnerable to see how they would respond. And do you know what I found? What? Most ignored me. Many actively avoided me. Your species is not perfect, Marcus Chin. You have cruelty and selfishness just like every other species. But then I found you. And you gave me your last meal. You spent resources you could not afford to spend. You helped me without counting the cost. And when I asked why, You said it seemed straightforward. Calith's hand dropped away from his forehead. That is what we do not understand. How can altruism be straightforward? How can helping the powerless make sense when the powerful rule everything? Marcus felt like he was starting to understand where this was going. You want to know if I'm special or if all humans are like this? I know you are not special, Calith said, and Marcus couldn't tell if that was an insult or a compliment. I researched you after our encounter. You are average by human standards. Orphaned, poor, working a menial job. You have no particular talents or achievements. You are, by all metrics, ordinary. Thanks, Marcus said dryly. You misunderstand, Calith said. Your ordinariness is what makes you extraordinary. If you, an average human, can show this kind of altruism, then perhaps all humans can. Perhaps this is not aberration but standard behavior. And if that is true, then humanity is the most dangerous species I have ever encountered. That made Marcus blink. Dangerous? We're barely out of our own solar system. You have 12,000 worlds. How are we dangerous? Calith turned away, walking back toward her throne. When she reached it, she didn't sit. Instead, she stood beside it, one hand resting on the dark branches. The Zirathi maintain order through power. We rule because we are stronger, faster, longer-lived. We have built an empire that has lasted 12,000 years on this principle. But humanity threatens to make power irrelevant. I don't understand, Marcus said. If beings help each other without power compelling them to do so, then what need is there for rulers? Calith's voice was soft, but carried perfectly through the vast chamber. If communities can form through mutual aid rather than hierarchical enforcement, then what purpose do empires serve? You and your kind could unravel everything the Zirathi have built, not through conquest, but through example. Marcus felt his head spinning. You're saying you're scared of us because we're nice to each other? Yes, Calith said simply. And no, it is more complex than that. But the core truth is this. Humanity represents a challenge to the fundamental assumptions upon which galactic civilization has been built. And I must decide what to do about it. The chamber went absolutely silent. Every Zirathi was watching their empress, waiting to see what she would say next. Marcus realized with a cold feeling in his gut that this was why he'd been brought here. Not to be thanked, not to be honored, but to be evaluated. Calith was trying to decide whether humanity was a threat that needed to be eliminated. So what are you going to do? Marcus asked, proud that his voice didn't shake. Calith looked at him for a long moment. Then, she did something that made every Zirathi in the chamber go rigid with shock. She knelt. The Empress of the Zirathi Dominion, ruler of 12,000 worlds, dropped to one knee in front of a human maintenance worker. I am going to ask for your help, she said. Marcus stared at her. My help? With what? Teaching me to be human, Calith said. Not physically, but philosophically. I want to understand how your people think, how you decide what is right, how you maintain these networks of mutual obligation. I want you to show me how humanity builds communities without power, creates meaning without conquest, and helps without expecting reward. I'm not a teacher, Marcus protested. I barely finished basic education. I'm just a guy who fixes water pipes. Exactly, Calith said. You are ordinary. And ordinary humans do extraordinary things as a matter of course. That is what I need to understand. That is what you will teach me. And if I say no? Calith stood up. Then you will return to your colony. I will leave your people alone. But I will not understand you. And what I do not understand, I eventually come to fear. And what I fear I destroy. Not because I wish to, but because it is the only tool I have been given. Marcus felt the weight of that statement settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him. This was about humanity's entire future. If he refused, Calith might decide that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to spread. She had the power to make that decision stick. 12,000 worlds worth of power. But if he agreed, he'd be leaving New Providence. Leaving the only home he'd ever known. Leaving Mrs. Yamada and her daughter and all the other people who depended on him to keep the water running and the air flowing. He'd be stepping into a world he didn't understand, trying to explain things he'd never really thought about. How long? Marcus asked. If I agree, how long would this take? I do not know, Calith said. Perhaps a cycle. Perhaps many cycles. However long it takes for me to understand. And you'll leave humanity alone? No conquest, no interference. I will leave your species to grow as you see fit. More than that, I will ensure that the rest of the Dominion does the same. You will be protected, Marcus Chun. You and all your kind. You have my word, which is the law of 12,000 worlds. Marcus thought about it. Thought about his cramped compartment on New Providence. Thought about the maintenance tunnels and the protein paste and the constant struggle to just survive. Thought about Mrs. Yamada's daughter, who probably still needed medicine he couldn't afford. Thought about all the people on that colony and all the other colonies, scratching out lives on the edges of space. Then, he thought about the woman in the alley. The way she'd whispered, please, with such desperation. The way she'd looked at him when he'd said helping was straightforward. The way she was looking at him now, with those gold eyes full of questions he didn't know how to answer. Okay, Marcus said. I'll try. I don't know if I can teach you what you want to learn, but I'll try. Caliph smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. That is all I ask. That is all any human seems to ask. The attempt, made in good faith. You are a strange species, Marcus Chen, and I think I am beginning to understand why that strangeness is precious. She turned to address the chamber. Let it be known throughout the Dominion. Humanity is under imperial protection. Any who harm them harm me. Any who threaten them face the full weight of the eternal throne. This is my will. The assembled Zirathi pressed their fists to their chests in unison. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder, and Marcus realized that he'd just witnessed something significant, something that would reshape the relationship between humanity and the galaxy. All because he'd given his lunch to a stranger. Commander Thess will show you to your quarters, Caliph said to Marcus. Rest. Tomorrow, your education begins. And mine. Marcus was led from the throne room in a daze. The corridors seemed less intimidating now, or maybe he was just too overwhelmed to be properly scared anymore. Thess remained silent until they reached a door that opened onto quarters that were larger than his entire compartment back home. The Empress has never knelt to anyone, Thess said quietly. Not in 10,000 years of rule. What you witnessed today will be spoken of for generations. I just want to help, Marcus said. I don't want to change anything. Thess looked at him with something that might have been pity or respect or both. Marcus Chun, you changed everything the moment you decided that one starving woman was worth your last meal. Now you must live with the consequences. She left him alone in quarters that had a viewport showing the stars wheeling by and a bed that could have fit 6 people. Marcus sat on the edge of that bed and tried to process everything that had happened. In the span of a week, he'd gone from being nobody to being responsible for teaching an empress what it meant to be human. He didn't feel qualified, didn't feel prepared, didn't feel like he deserved any of this attention or responsibility. But he'd made a promise, and Marcus Chun kept his promises. Even the impossible ones. Especially the impossible ones. Somewhere on this ship, an empress was preparing to learn what kindness meant, and Marcus was going to try his best to teach her, even if he didn't fully understand it himself. Because that was what humans did. They tried. They helped. They showed up for each other, even when it made no logical sense to do so. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Marcus woke to the sound of chimes that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. For a confused moment, he thought he was back in his compartment on New Providence, and the sound was the colony's morning alarm. Then, he opened his eyes and saw the viewport filled with stars, and remembered where he was. He sat up slowly, his back protesting. The bed was too soft, too luxurious. He'd spent the whole night on the very edge of it, unable to shake the feeling that he was contaminating something precious just by touching it. Now his muscles ached, and his head felt fuzzy, and he had no idea what time it was or what was expected of him. The door chimed again, more insistently this time. Marcus stumbled over to it, still wearing the clothes he'd worn yesterday. When the door opened, he found himself facing Commander Thess, who looked like she'd been awake for hours, and found it offensive that Marcus hadn't been. The Empress requests your presence in the observation garden, Thess said. You will bathe first. Your garments will be replaced with appropriate attire. I don't need new clothes, Marcus started to say, but Thess was already walking away, leaving him in the doorway. A service drone appeared from somewhere, hovering at shoulder height, and emitting a soft beeping sound. It projected a holographic arrow pointing back into his quarters, toward a door Marcus hadn't noticed last night. He followed it into what turned out to be a bathroom larger than most apartments he'd seen, filled with amenities he couldn't identify and fixtures that seemed to activate through sheer willpower. 20 minutes later, after a shower in water that somehow felt alive and cleaner than anything he'd ever experienced, Marcus found himself wearing clothes that had appeared while he was bathing. They looked like his maintenance coveralls, but felt completely different against his skin. The material was some kind of adaptive fabric that adjusted to his body temperature, and the whole outfit seemed to repair small damages automatically. It was the most expensive thing he'd ever worn, and it was supposed to be casual wear. The service drone guided him through corridors he didn't recognize, past viewports that showed different parts of the ship, and occasionally opened onto glimpses of space that made Marcus's breath catch. He saw a planet rotating slowly in the distance, its surface covered in geometric patterns that suggested massive cities. He saw other ships, smaller than the Eternal Throne but still enormous, moving in formation like schools of fish. He saw things he didn't have words for, technology and architecture that seemed to bend the rules of physics just because they could. The observation garden turned out to be a chamber under a massive transparent dome. Inside, plants from what must have been 100 different worlds grew in careful arrangements that managed to look both designed and wild. Water flowed through channels carved into the floor, and the air smelled like growth and earth and something else Marcus couldn't quite identify. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest hurt. Caliph was standing near the center of the garden, beside a tree with silver bark and leaves that chimed softly when they moved. She was wearing simpler clothes than yesterday, robes that looked more comfortable than ceremonial. Her crown was gone, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger this way, more like the woman in the alley, and less like the empress on the throne. "Marcus Chun," she said when she saw him. "Come, sit with me. We have much to discuss." Marcus walked over, trying not to stare at the plants. There was something with purple flowers that seemed to track his movement, and a vine covered in bioluminescent patterns that wrote out equations he couldn't understand. He sat on a bench that Caliph indicated, and she sat beside him, close enough to talk comfortably, but not so close as to be uncomfortable. "I have been thinking about our conversation," Caliph said without preamble, "about why you helped me, and I realized that I asked the wrong question." "What should you have asked?" Marcus said. "Not why you helped, but why you did not refuse help when you were clearly struggling yourself." "I researched your financial situation, Marcus Chin. You had 43 credits that day. You spent 31 of them on me. The remaining 12 were not enough to purchase the medicine you needed for your neighbor's child. Yet you did not mention this. You did not negotiate. You simply gave." "What?" Marcus felt uncomfortable discussing this. "Mrs. Yamada's daughter needed medicine. I was going to figure something out. But you chose to prioritize my immediate need over hers. A stranger over a neighbor. An alien over one of your own community. By any logical measure, this was the wrong choice. Yet you made it without hesitation. I need you to explain the reasoning to me." "There wasn't reasoning," Marcus said. "Not really. You were dying right in front of me. Mrs. Yamada's daughter was sick, but she wasn't about to die in the next hour. I could solve your problem immediately. Hers would take more time, but I had time. That's all." "But you did not have time," Caliph pointed out. "You did not know if you would find another way to earn credits before the child's condition worsened. You gambled on your ability to solve a future problem in order to solve a present one. This is irrational from a survival perspective." Marcus rubbed his face, trying to figure out how to explain something he'd never really thought about consciously. "Okay, look, here's the thing. On New Providence, we're all barely hanging on. Most of us are one bad break away from not making it. The only way any of us survive is by helping each other when we can. If I see someone who needs immediate help, I help them, because I know that next week it might be me who needs help. We don't keep score. We just show up for each other. That's how it works." "But I was not part of your community," Caliph said. "I could not reciprocate. By your own logic, helping me made no sense." "You were part of the bigger community," Marcus said. "The one that includes everyone who's trying to survive. You needed help. I could give it. End of calculation." Caliph was quiet for a long moment, her gold eyes studying him. "You speak of calculation, but What you describe is the opposite of calculation. You operate on assumptions that override logical assessment. You assume that helping is valuable independent of potential return. You assume that all beings deserve aid regardless of their ability to reciprocate. These are not rational positions. Maybe not, Marcus said. But they work. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We're still here. Barely, Caliph said. Your species controls perhaps 24 systems. You have no unified government, no coherent military, no technological advantages. By galactic standards, humanity is insignificant. And yet you're scared of us, Marcus said quietly. Calith's eyes flashed. I did not say scared. I said you were dangerous. Same thing, isn't it? Perhaps. Calith stood up and walked over to the tree with silver bark. She touched one of the chiming leaves gently. This tree comes from Thalmora, a world the Zirathi conquered 6,000 years ago. The Thalmorans were a peaceful species. They believed in universal compassion, in helping all beings regardless of allegiance or utility. They welcomed us when we arrived. They offered us aid, resources, a place in their communities. They thought we would reciprocate. What happened? Marcus asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. We conquered them, Caliph said simply. We took their worlds, absorbed their populations, integrated their technology. Within 3 generations, the Thalmoran species ceased to exist as a separate entity. They had been too kind, too willing to help, too ready to assume the best in others. Their compassion made them easy prey. She turned to look at Marcus. That is why your behavior concerns me. Humanity shows the same patterns. The same willingness to help without calculating cost. The same assumption that altruism will be reciprocated. And history suggests that species like yours do not survive long in a galaxy run by species like mine. But we are surviving, Marcus said. We're spreading, even without your advantages. Maybe kindness is stronger than you think. Or perhaps you have simply not encountered a threat large enough to test that theory, Caliph said. The Zirathi Dominion is not the only power in this galaxy. There are others who would see humanity's weakness and exploit it, who would accept your help and then destroy you, who would use your compassion as a weapon against you. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Are you warning me or threatening me? I am stating facts, Caliph said, and trying to understand why you persist in behavior that logic suggests should have been eliminated by natural selection long ago. Help me understand, Marcus Chun. Help me see what I am missing. Because I look at you and see a species that should not exist, that defies every rule of survival. And yet you thrive in conditions that would break others. There is something here I do not comprehend. Something that makes your weakness into strength. Show me what it is. Marcus thought about New Providence. About the community gardens where people shared food they'd grown in recycled soil. About the childcare cooperatives where parents took turns watching each other's kids. About the maintenance crews who taught new members their skills for free, ensuring the knowledge survived. About Mrs. Yamada, who would sometimes cook extra food and leave it outside his door with a note saying she'd accidentally made too much, even though they both knew she'd made it specifically for him. It's not just helping, Marcus said slowly. It's connection. When you help someone, you're not just solving their immediate problem. You're telling them they matter, that they're worth caring about. And when people feel that, when they know they're part of something bigger than themselves, they become stronger. They try harder. They care more. They help others, and the whole system becomes more resilient. But this requires trust, Caliph said. Trust that others will reciprocate. Trust that the system will persist. Trust that kindness will not be exploited. How do you maintain that trust when evidence suggests it is often misplaced? We don't always, Marcus admitted. People get hurt. People get betrayed. Sometimes helping someone bites you in the ass. But most of the time, it doesn't. Most of the time, people are decent. Most of the time, if you show up for others, they show up for you. And even when they don't, even when you get screwed over, the act of helping still means something. It still makes you the kind of person you want to be. Caliph walked back and sat down beside him again. This is the part one struggle with. The idea that action has value independent of outcome. In Zirathi philosophy, all actions are judged by their results. A victory is good because it increases power. A defeat is bad because it decreases power. The morality of an action is determined entirely by its consequences. That sounds exhausting, Marcus said. How do you ever just do something because it feels right? We do not, Caliph said simply. We calculate. We assess. We choose the path that maximizes power and minimizes risk. This is how we have built an empire that has lasted 12,000 years. And are you happy? Marcus asked. The question seemed to catch Caliph off guard. Happy. Yeah. Happy. Satisfied. Content. Do you wake up in the morning feeling good about your life and the choices you've made? Caliph was quiet for a long moment. I am Empress. My personal feelings are irrelevant. I exist to serve the Dominion, to ensure its strength and continuity. My happiness or lack thereof does not factor into any calculation of value. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Marcus said. Caliph looked at him sharply. You pity me? You, who has nothing. Pity me, who commands 12,000 worlds. Yeah, Marcus said. I do. Because I might not have 12,000 worlds, but I have moments where I feel like my life matters, where I feel connected to something real, where I help someone, and they smile at me, and I know I made their day a little better. That's worth more to me than all the power in the galaxy. But you cannot quantify that value, Caliph said. You cannot measure it or trade it or use it to achieve concrete goals. It is ephemeral, meaningless in material terms. So is music, Marcus said. So is art. So is the feeling you get when you watch a sunrise. Just because something can't be measured doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Humans figured that out a long time ago. Maybe the Zirathi need to learn it too. Caliph stood up abruptly. For a moment, Marcus thought he'd gone too far, insulted her somehow. But when she spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than angry. Walk with me, she said. I want to show you something. She led him deeper into the garden, past plants that seemed to reach toward them, and pools of water that reflected images of distant stars. They walked in silence for several minutes before Caliph stopped beside a small pond. In the center of the pond, a single flower floated on the surface. It was blue, a shade so pure and deep that it almost hurt to look at. This is a memory blossom, Caliph said. They are native to my homeworld. They bloom only once every 100 years, and they die within hours of blooming. This one opened this morning. By tomorrow, it will be gone. It's beautiful, Marcus said. Yes, Caliph said, and utterly useless. It serves no purpose. It cannot be eaten or processed into medicine or used as a component in any technology. It exists only to be beautiful, and then to die. By Zirathi logic, we should have eliminated them long ago. They take up space and resources that could be used for something practical. But you didn't eliminate them, Marcus said. No, Caliph said softly. We kept them, and I have never understood why until now. When I look at this flower, I feel something. Something that cannot be quantified or measured. Something that makes no logical sense. But it is real nonetheless. This is what you were speaking of, is it not? This value that exists independent of utility. Yeah, Marcus said. That's exactly it. Humans call it beauty, or joy, or meaning. It's the stuff that makes life worth living, even when life is hard. Caliph reached out and touched the surface of the water, creating ripples that made the flower bob gently. And you maintain that this has actual value? That preserving such things is worth the cost? Absolutely, Marcus said. In fact, I'd argue it's the most important thing. Power and conquest and empire. All of that matters only if you're building towards something. If you're creating a galaxy where beings can experience beauty and joy and connection. Otherwise, what's the point? You're just accumulating power for its own sake, and that's a game with no winners. The Zirathi would say that the point is survival, Caliph said. That power ensures continuity. That strength protects against threats. And how many memory blossoms have the Zirathi destroyed in the name of survival? Marcus asked quietly. How many cultures, how many art forms, how many moments of beauty have been sacrificed to make the empire stronger? Was it worth it? Caliph pulled her hand back from the water. That is a dangerous question, Marcus Chin. It implies that the entire foundation of Zirathi civilization might be flawed. I'm not saying it's flawed, Marcus said. I'm saying it's incomplete. You've built an empire that can last 12,000 years. That's amazing. But what's the empire for? What are you protecting? If the answer is just more empire, Then, you're missing something important. They stood by the pond in silence, watching the memory blossom float on the surface. Marcus thought about the woman in the alley, how she'd looked at him with such surprise when he'd helped her, how she'd said he was strange. Maybe to someone who'd spent their life accumulating power, kindness did seem strange. Maybe to someone who measured everything in terms of utility, beauty seemed worthless. But that didn't make those things any less real or valuable. It just meant the Zirathi were using the wrong measuring tools. I need to think about this, Caliph said finally. What you are suggesting represents a fundamental challenge to how I understand reality. I cannot simply accept it without careful consideration. That's fair, Marcus said. I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe there's more than one way to build a civilization. That maybe humans aren't doing everything wrong. Perhaps, Caliph said. Or perhaps you are engaged in a slow form of collective suicide that simply has not reached its conclusion yet. Time will tell. She turned away from the pond and began walking back toward the entrance. Marcus followed, his mind churning. He'd come here thinking he would teach an empress about kindness. But the reality was more complex. Caliph wasn't ignorant or cruel. She was operating from a completely different framework, one where power and survival were the only metrics that mattered. Convincing her that other things had value was going to be harder than he'd realized. They reached the entrance to the garden, and Caliph stopped. Tomorrow, I want you to show me how humans build community in practice. Not theory, but actual implementation. I want to observe your decision-making processes in real-world situations. Can this be arranged? I guess. Marcus said. What did you have in mind? We will visit a human colony. Not yours, but one similar. You will act as my guide. You will explain the behaviors you observe. You will help me understand why humans organize themselves the way they do. And I will reserve judgment until I have seen enough to form an informed opinion. Marcus felt a mix of relief and anxiety. On one hand, getting out of this massive ship and back to something resembling normal life sounded good. On the other hand, the idea of parading an empress through a human colony while trying to explain basic social interactions felt like a recipe for disaster. Okay, he said. I'll try. But I can't promise you'll like what you see. Human colonies are messy. We're figuring this out as we go. All species are figuring it out as they go, Caliph said. The Zirathi simply pretend otherwise. Perhaps there is value in honesty about our limitations. She reached out and touched his forehead again, that ceremonial gesture that seemed to mean something significant in Zirathi culture. Thank you, Marcus-chun, for your patience, for your willingness to explain things that must seem obvious to you, for not treating me like an empress in this moment, but simply like someone trying to learn. You're welcome, Marcus said, and meant it, because beneath the power and the title and the weight of 12,000 worlds, Caliph was just someone trying to understand something new. And helping people understand things, even if they were empresses, still felt like the right thing to do, even if it sometimes scared the hell out of him. The colony was called Haven's Rest, and it made New Providence look prosperous by comparison. Marcus stood at the viewport of the shuttle as they descended, watching the dome structure grow larger. It was smaller than his home colony, maybe 20,000 people, and the exterior showed signs of hasty repair work. Sections of the dome had been patched with mismatched materials, and the docking towers looked like they'd been salvaged from at least 3 different ship classes. This place is barely functioning, Commander Thess said from behind him. She'd insisted on accompanying them, along with a security detail that Caliph had reluctantly allowed. The atmospheric recyclers are operating at 60% efficiency. The power grid shows multiple redundancies that suggest frequent failures. Why do humans persist in settling worlds like this? Because we don't have a lot of better options, Marcus said. When you're just starting out in space, you take what you can get. Haven's Rest probably started as a mining operation or a fuel depot. Then, people started staying, and before you know it, you've got a colony. Caliph was sitting in the passenger section, wearing clothes that Marcus had insisted looked too expensive. She'd changed into something simpler, but even her attempts at casual clothing looked like they cost more than most colonists would see in a year. Her skin patterns were carefully dimmed, and she'd done something to her eyes to make them less obviously gold. But she still looked alien, and She still moved with that unconscious grace that marked her as someone important. "Remember," Marcus said as the shuttle docked, "you're just a trader passing through. Don't do anything Empress-like. Don't make declarations or offer to solve problems. Just observe and listen." "I know how to conduct field research," Caliph said drily. "I spent 7 days observing your colony before revealing myself. I am capable of subtlety." "You also spent most of those 7 days looking like you were dying," Marcus pointed out. "People treated you differently because of that. Here, you need to blend in." "I will endeavor to be sufficiently ordinary," Caliph said, and there was a hint of amusement in her voice. The docking port opened onto a corridor that smelled like recycled air and machine oil. It was immediately familiar to Marcus, that particular combination of scents that every human colony seemed to share. The walls were covered in handwritten signs directing people to various services, and the lighting flickered in a way that suggested maintenance was overdue. A man was waiting for them at the entrance to the main hub. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years of exposure to artificial atmospheric controls. He wore a vest covered in patches from various ships and companies, and his smile was genuine if tired. "Welcome to Haven's Rest," he said. "I'm Garrett Moss, station coordinator. You folks from the Zirithi ship that's been hanging out in orbit?" Marcus had sent a message ahead, explaining that they were traders interested in observing colony life. It wasn't entirely a lie, and it was better than explaining that an empress wanted to study human social dynamics. "That's right," Marcus said. "I'm Marcus, this is Kale. We're researching trade opportunities in this sector. Wanted to get a feel for how the colonies operate." Garrett's eyes lingered on Caliph for a moment, clearly noting her alienness, but his expression remained friendly. "Well, you picked an interesting time to visit. We've got a situation developing that's about to require some community problem solving. You're welcome to observe if you want." "What kind of situation?" Caliph asked. "Our main water recycler is failing," Garrett said, leading them into the hub. "We've got maybe 48 hours before it goes completely offline. After that, we'll be on emergency reserves, which gives us another 72 hours if we ration carefully. The replacement parts we need are 3 weeks out on the next supply ship. So we need to figure out how to stretch our water supply for that long, or find an alternative solution." Marcus felt his maintenance instincts kick in. "Have you tried bypassing the secondary filters? Sometimes you can jury-rig a temporary solution using the backup systems." "Already did that," Garrett said. "Bought us an extra day, but the core processor is shot. Without it, we can't efficiently separate the wastewater components. We're working with what we've got, but it's not good." They entered the main hub, a large open space that served as the colony's social center. It was packed with people, and Marcus immediately recognized what was happening. This wasn't a normal day. This was a community meeting, the kind that happened when everyone needed to be involved in a major decision. "Town hall?" Marcus asked. "Started about an hour ago," Garrett said. "We're trying to figure out who can cut back on water usage, and by how much. It's not going well. Nobody wants to be the one to sacrifice more than their neighbor." Marcus glanced at Caliph. This was perfect. This was exactly the kind of situation that would show her how humans work together in crisis. Or failed to work together, depending on how the meeting went. They found seats near the back, and watched as the discussion unfolded. A woman was standing at the front, trying to mediate between different groups. Some people were arguing that everyone should cut back equally. Others insisted that people with children needed more water. A man in the corner was shouting that the colony administrators should solve the problem without involving civilians. It was messy and loud and completely chaotic. Marcus could see Caliph taking it all in, her gold eyes sharp despite their disguise. "This is inefficient," she murmured. "One person should make a decision and enforce it. This debate will waste time and create resentment." "Maybe," Marcus said, "but it's also fair. Everyone gets a say. Everyone's needs are heard. And, meanwhile, the water runs out," Caliph said. On stage, the woman was starting to lose control of the meeting. People were talking over each other, voices getting heated. Marcus saw a fight about to break out near the front, 2 men squaring off over some perceived slight. Then, something happened that Marcus had seen before but never quite understood. A woman near the middle stood up. She wasn't anyone special, just another colonist in work clothes. But when she started speaking, people quieted down to listen. Hey, she said. Hey, we're not doing this. We're not going to tear each other apart over water. That's not who we are. Easy for you to say, someone shouted. You don't have kids depending on you. I have kids, the woman shot back. 2 of them. And you know what I'm going to tell them? I'm going to tell them that we all cut back because that's what neighbors do. That we all sacrifice a little so nobody has to sacrifice everything. Another person stood up. She's right. This isn't about who needs what. This is about all of us getting through this together. Then another person stood. And another. Within minutes, the angry crowd had transformed into something else. People were volunteering to cut back more than their share. Families were offering to help neighbors with efficiency tips. Someone mentioned a gray water recycling technique they'd learned on another colony. Someone else offered to teach water-saving cooking methods. The fight that had been brewing dissipated. The anger turned into something productive. And, within half an hour, the community had worked out a rationing plan that everyone could live with. It wasn't perfect. Some people were clearly going to be more uncomfortable than others. But it was fair, and, more importantly, everyone had agreed to it. Caliph watched it all in silence, her expression unreadable. After the meeting broke up, Garrett came over to where they were sitting. Well, that went better than I expected. Usually takes a few meetings before we reach consensus. Guess people are taking this seriously. What happens if someone doesn't stick to the rationing plan? Caliph asked. Garrett shrugged. Social pressure mostly. People notice who's not pulling their weight. Nobody wants to be that person. Usually, the threat of being excluded from community activities is enough to keep folks honest. And if it is not enough, then we deal with it. Talk to them, figure out why they're struggling, help them find a solution. We don't have formal laws or enforcement mechanisms here. We're too small for that. We rely on people caring about their neighbors. Mostly it works. Mostly, Caliph repeated softly. They spent the rest of the day walking through Haven's Rest, and Marcus watched Caliph's reactions carefully. She saw parents teaching their children how to monitor water usage, turning it into a game. She saw neighbors sharing meals, pooling resources to reduce individual water needs for cooking. She saw a group of teenagers organizing to help elderly colonists with their water-saving measures. But she also saw arguments. She saw a man refusing to cut back as much as others, insisting his work was too important. She saw families hoarding supplies, worried that the community solution wouldn't work. She saw the cracks in the system, the places where cooperation broke down and self-interest took over. In the late afternoon, they stopped at a small cafe that served synthetic coffee and pastries. Marcus ordered for both of them, and they sat by a window overlooking the colony's hydroponics bay. Your assessment? Marcus asked. Caliph was quiet for a long moment. It is remarkable and deeply flawed. Your people respond to crisis with spontaneous organization. They volunteer to sacrifice without being compelled. They create social structures that rely entirely on voluntary compliance. This is unprecedented in my experience. But, Marcus prompted. But, it only works because you are small, Caliph said. 20,000 people can know each other. They can maintain social pressure through personal relationships. Your system scales well to the tribal level, but begins to fail at larger populations. This is why humanity has not built an empire. Your organizational method cannot accommodate billions of individuals. Maybe we don't need empires, Marcus said. Maybe lots of small communities working together is better than one massive hierarchy. That theory will be tested when humanity encounters a species that has chosen the hierarchical path, Caliph said. When you face an empire like the Zirathi, your loose confederations will crumble. This is inevitable. Unless we have allies, Marcus said. Unless we've built enough goodwill through our kindness and cooperation that other species help us when we need it. Caliph's expression was skeptical. You are assuming that others share your values. They do not. Most species in this galaxy operate on principles similar to the Zirathi. Power, hierarchy, conquest. Your altruism will be seen as weakness and exploited accordingly. Marcus took a sip of his terrible coffee. Then, why are you here? Why did you decide to learn about humanity instead of just conquering us? If we're so weak, why not just take what you want? Because, Caliph said slowly, I am not certain you are weak. I am not certain I understand what strength means in your context. The Zirathi measure strength in ships, and soldiers, and resources. But, I watched that meeting today, and I saw something that might be stronger than any of those things. What did you see? I saw people choosing to suffer for each other. Not because they were compelled. Not because they expected direct compensation. But because they had decided that their community's survival was more important than individual comfort. That is not weakness, Marcus Chun. I do not know what it is, but it is not weakness. A woman approached their table, middle-aged with a kind face. Excuse me, she said. I couldn't help overhearing. You're researching trade opportunities. That's right, Marcus said. Well, I run a small manufacturing operation here. We produce water seals and gaskets for ship maintenance. Not glamorous, but there's always demand. If you're looking for products to trade, I'd be happy to talk. We appreciate the offer, Caliph said carefully. But we are still in the observation phase of our research. The woman nodded. Of course. But if you're here tomorrow, stop by Workshop 7. I'll show you around, no obligation. It's always good to meet new people, even if business doesn't work out. After she left, Caliph looked at Marcus. She approached us unprompted, offered information and access to her operation, did not demand payment or guarantee of future business. Why? Because building relationships is valuable, Marcus said. Even if this specific interaction doesn't lead to business, she's now connected to us. We might remember her later. We might refer others to her. Or maybe she just likes meeting new people. Not everything has to have an immediate payoff. But everything costs something, Caliph said. Her time has value. Why spend it on uncertain returns? Because certain returns aren't the only things worth pursuing, Marcus said. Sometimes the uncertain stuff ends up being more valuable. You can't predict where the next good opportunity will come from, so you stay open to possibilities. You build networks. You treat people well. And, eventually, some of that comes back to help you. They stayed in the cafe for another hour, watching people come and go. Marcus pointed out interactions to Caliph, explaining the unspoken social dynamics. How people held doors for each other. How they asked about each other's families. How they shared information freely, without expecting payment. How they built and maintained a web of social obligations that existed entirely outside any formal structure. You know what I think? Marcus said eventually. I think the Zirathi are lonely. Caliph looked at him sharply. What? You've built this empire based on power and hierarchy. Everyone knows their place. Everyone follows the rules. But does anyone actually care about each other? Do you have friends, Caliph? Real friends, not subordinates or advisors. People who like you for who you are, not what you can do for them. I am the Empress, Caliph said stiffly. Personal relationships would compromise my objectivity. That's what I thought, Marcus said. You're surrounded by billions of people, and you're completely alone. That's got to be horrible. It is necessary, Caliph said. Is it? Or is it just the way things have always been done? Because from where I'm sitting, you've sacrificed something really important in exchange for power. You've given up connection. And I don't think that trade is worth it. Caliph stood up abruptly. We should return to the ship. I have seen enough for today. They walked back to the docking port in silence. Commander Thess and the security detail fell in around them, but kept their distance. Marcus could tell he'd hit a nerve, but he wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Challenging an empress's entire worldview probably wasn't the smartest thing he'd ever done. As they were about to board the shuttle, a child ran up to them. She was maybe 8 years old, with messy hair and a bright smile. Excuse me, she said to Caliph. Are you an alien? You look different. Caliph looked down at the child. For a moment, Marcus thought she might ignore the question or give some formal response. But, instead, she knelt down to be at eye level with the girl. Yes, Caliph said. I am from very far away. My people look different from humans. That's cool, the girl said. Are you nice? My mom says some aliens are nice, and some aren't. Your mother is wise, Caliph said. I try to be nice. I do not always succeed. Nobody's nice all the time, the girl said seriously. But trying is important. That's what my teacher says. Your teacher is also wise, Caliph said. What is your name? Emma. What's yours? Kale, Caliph said. It is pleasant to meet you, Emma. You too, Emma said brightly. Then, she ran off, already distracted by something else. Caliph stood up slowly. She looked shaken, though Marcus couldn't quite figure out why. That child approached me without fear. Spoke to me without deference. Assumed I would be kind to her. That's pretty normal for human kids, Marcus said. We teach them to be cautious of strangers, but not to be automatically afraid. Emma probably figures that if you were dangerous, the adults around here would handle it. She trusted that the community would protect her, Caliph said quietly. She felt safe to be curious because she believed others would ensure her safety. This is the foundation of everything, is it not? This assumption of collective protection. Yeah, Marcus said. I guess it is. We trust that other people won't let bad things happen to us. And most of the time, they don't. That's how society works. Caliph was quiet during the shuttle ride back to the Eternal Throne. Marcus left her alone with her thoughts, figuring she needed time to process everything. When they reached the ship, she turned to him before heading to her quarters. Tomorrow, she said, I want you to explain friendship to me. Not the concept. I understand the concept. But the practice. How do humans create and maintain bonds that have no hierarchical structure? How do you trust people who have no obligation to you? How do you open yourself to others when doing so creates vulnerability? That's a tall order, Marcus said. But you will try, Caliph said. Because that is what you do. You try to help, even when the task seems impossible. She touched his forehead again, that gesture that was becoming familiar. You are teaching me, Marcus Chun. Perhaps not in the ways you intended. But you are teaching me nonetheless. And I find that I am grateful for the lesson, even though it frightens me. Why does it frighten you? Marcus asked. Because if you are right, Caliph said softly, then I have wasted 10,000 years of my life building the wrong kind of empire. And that is a difficult thing for an empress to accept. She walked away before Marcus could respond, leaving him alone in the corridor. He stood there for a long moment, thinking about empires and loneliness and the cost of power. Thinking about a child named Emma who'd talked to an alien without fear because she trusted her community to keep her safe. Thinking about all the small acts of kindness and connection that humans performed every day without even realizing how remarkable they were. Maybe the Zirathi were right. Maybe humanity's approach to civilization was doomed to fail when confronted with harder, more ruthless species. But maybe, just maybe, there was something in the human way of doing things that was worth preserving. Something that made life worth living, even if it didn't maximize power or ensure survival. Marcus Chun had never wanted to be important. He'd never wanted to change the galaxy. But, somehow, he'd ended up trying to teach an empress what it meant to be human. And that was either the most important thing he'd ever do, or the most catastrophic mistake in human history. He was really hoping for the former. 3 months had passed since Marcus had first boarded the Eternal Throne. 3 months of conversations and observations, of trying to explain concepts that he'd never really articulated before. 3 months of watching Caliph struggle with ideas that challenged everything she'd built her identity around. And 3 months of wondering if any of this was actually making a difference. They were in the observation garden again, beneath the transparent dome that showed the stars wheeling past. The memory blossom had long since died, but new plants had been added. Caliph had started bringing specimens from different worlds, studying them not for their utility, but for their beauty. It was a small change, but Marcus thought it meant something. I spoke with the Council of 10 today, Caliph said without preamble. They are concerned about the amount of time I am spending on what they call the human project. They believe I am becoming too invested in a species that poses no immediate threat or benefit to the Dominion. Marcus felt his stomach clench. He'd known this was coming. 3 months was a long time for an empress to spend on one subject. What did you tell them? I told them that understanding humanity is critical to the Dominion's long-term survival, Caliph said. That your species represents a novel approach to civilization that we must either learn from or prepare to defend against. This satisfied them for now. But they are losing patience, Marcus. I must soon make a decision about humanity's place in the galaxy. What are the options? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Caliph stood and walked to the edge of the dome, looking out at the stars. Option 1. We leave humanity alone entirely. We mark your territory as restricted and ensure that no Zirathi ship enters your space without explicit permission. You are free to grow and develop as you see fit, with no interference from us. This is the least invasive option. Sounds good, Marcus said cautiously. What's the catch? The catch is that we offer no protection. If another species decides to conquer or destroy humanity, we do not intervene. You face the galaxy alone, with only your own resources to defend yourselves. Given humanity's current military capabilities, this likely means eventual subjugation or extinction. Marcus felt cold. Option 2. We absorb humanity into the Dominion, Caliph said. Your worlds become part of our empire. You retain local autonomy but answer to Zirathi authority in matters of defense, trade, and interstellar relations. You gain our protection and access to our technology. But you also lose your independence. You become part of something larger, and in doing so, you lose the ability to chart your own course. And option 3, Caliph turned to face him. We eliminate humanity before you become a threat. A surgical strike on your major population centers, destroying your ability to expand further into the galaxy. It would be quick, relatively painless, and it would ensure that the Dominion never has to face a species whose values and methods we do not fully understand. Marcus felt like he'd been punched. You're seriously considering genocide? I am seriously considering all options, Caliph said quietly. That is what an empress does. I do not favor this option, Marcus. But I would be failing in my duty if I did not consider it. Humanity represents a form of cultural warfare that the Zirathi have no defense against. Your kindness, your altruism, your willingness to help without expectation of return, these things could undermine the entire hierarchical structure that keeps the Dominion functional. If our people start to question whether power should be the basis of civilization, the empire could fracture. Millions could die in the resulting chaos. So you'd kill billions to prevent millions from dying? Marcus said. That's insane. That is leadership, Caliph said. Sometimes there are no good choices. Only less terrible ones. Marcus stood up, his hands shaking. Is that what you really think? That we're so dangerous that the only solution is to wipe us out? I do not know what I think, Caliph said. And there was genuine pain in her voice. 3 months ago, I understood the universe. Power was the only currency that mattered. Strength determined outcomes. Hierarchy ensured order. But then, I met you, Marcus Chun. I met a man who gave his last meal to a stranger. I spent 3 months learning about a species that builds communities based on trust rather than force. And now I do not know what anything means anymore. She walked over to him, close enough that he could see the patterns on her skin pulsing with emotion. You asked me once if I was happy. I did not understand the question then. But I understand it now. And the answer is no. I have never been happy. I have been powerful. I have been feared and respected. I have ruled 12,000 worlds and commanded the loyalty of billions. But I have never had what you have. I have never had friends. I have never had a community that cared about me for who I am rather than what I represent. I have never felt like I belonged to something larger than myself. You could have those things, Marcus said. You could change how the Dominion works. Make it more like what we have. And watch it fall apart. Caliph said, the Dominion works because everyone understands their place. Because power is clear and hierarchy is maintained. If I introduce uncertainty, if I allow people to question whether might makes right, the entire structure could collapse. I could destroy in years what took 12,000 years to build. Or you could build something better, Marcus said. Something that doesn't require you to be alone. Something that values people for more than their utility. That is a pleasant dream, Caliph said. But I am not certain it is possible at the scale of an empire. Your methods work for 20,000 people. Can they work for 400 billion? I don't know, Marcus admitted. But I know that the alternative is worse. If you choose power over connection, if you choose control over community, then you're just going to keep being lonely. And eventually, that loneliness is going to kill you. Maybe not physically, but in every way that matters. Caliph was quiet for a long moment. Then, she did something Marcus had never seen her do before. She sat down on the ground, right there in the garden, and put her head in her hands. It was such a human gesture, such a clear expression of despair, that Marcus didn't know what to do. He sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. I want what you have, Caliph said quietly. I want to know what it feels like to be part of something, to have people care about me, to help others without calculating the return. I want to understand why Emma approached me without fear, why that woman in the cafe offered to show me her workshop, why you gave me food when you had nothing. I want to feel connected. But I do not know how. You start small, Marcus said. You can't change an empire overnight. But you can change yourself. You can start making decisions based on what you think is right, not just what maintains power. You can start treating people as friends instead of subjects. You can start building the kind of relationships that make life worth living. And if the empire falls apart because of it, then maybe the empire needed to fall apart, Marcus said. Maybe something better can grow in its place. Something that takes the best parts of the Zirathi, the stability and the technology and the organizational ability, and combines it with the best parts of humanity, the compassion and the community and the willingness to help. Maybe you could build something that's better than either of us alone. Caliph lifted her head and looked at him. You believe this is possible? Truly, I think it's worth trying, Marcus said. And if it doesn't work, at least you'll know. At least you'll have tried to build something meaningful instead of just maintaining something powerful. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. Marcus thought about New Providence, about Mrs. Yamada and her daughter, about all the people scratching out lives in difficult places. He thought about what would happen if Caliph chose genocide. All those people, gone in an instant. All those communities, erased. All that potential for kindness and connection, destroyed in the name of maintaining order. I have made my decision, Caliph said finally. Marcus felt his heart racing. And I choose option 4, Caliph said. There is no option 4. There is now, Caliph said, standing up. I choose to experiment. I will select one Zirathi world, a smaller colony on the outer rim. I will introduce human methods there. I will encourage community building without hierarchical enforcement. I will teach the principles you have taught me. And I will see what happens. That's incredibly risky, Marcus said. Yes, Caliph agreed. It could fail spectacularly. The colony could fall into chaos. It could become vulnerable to attack. The experiment could prove that hierarchy is necessary and that human methods do not scale. But it also could succeed. It could demonstrate that there is another way to organize a civilization. And if it succeeds on one world, it could be expanded to others. And humanity? Marcus asked. What happens to us? You remain independent, Caliph said. But I extend the Dominion's protection to your space. Any species that threatens humanity threatens the Zirathi. Any attack on your worlds is an attack on our empire. You gain our protection without losing your autonomy. Why would you do that? Marcus asked. What's in it for you? Because I need you, Caliph said simply. I need humans to teach the Zirathi how to be something other than conquerors. I need your example. I need your kindness. And I need to know that somewhere in this galaxy, there is a species that builds communities based on trust. Because if this experiment fails, if I try to change the Dominion and it falls apart, humanity will be proof that there is another way. That civilization can exist without hierarchy. That connection matters more than power. Marcus stood up too. You're asking us to be your backup plan? I am asking you to be my inspiration, Caliph said. And my friend. Because I have realized something over these 3 months. I do not want to be alone anymore. I do not want to rule from a throne, surrounded by subjects who fear me. I want what you have. I want to be part of a community. I want to matter to people for who I am, not what I can do to them. And I cannot have that as long as I remain locked into the role of Empress. So I must change. And I must change the Dominion. And I need your help to do it. She held out her hand, a very human gesture. Will you help me, Marcus Chin? Will you teach me to be more than an empress? Will you show me how to be a friend? Marcus looked at her hand, thought about everything that had happened since that day in the alley, thought about the choice he'd made to spend his last credits on a stranger, thought about how that small decision had led to this moment, standing in a garden on a ship that ruled 12,000 worlds, being asked to help reshape galactic civilization. It was insane. It was impossible. It was way more responsibility than a maintenance worker from New Providence should ever have to bear. But it was also right, because helping people was what humans did. Even when those people were empresses who ruled empires and could destroy planets with a word. Even when the stakes were impossibly high and the outcome uncertain. Even when it meant stepping into the unknown and hoping for the best. Marcus took her hand. Yeah, he said, I'll help, but I'm going to need backup. We're going to need more humans involved in this. People smarter than me. People who actually understand sociology and psychology and all that stuff. I can show you what we do, but teaching an entire empire? That's going to take a team. Caliph smiled, that transformation of her face that Marcus had first seen in an alley. I will arrange for a delegation of humans to join us. Scholars, teachers, community organizers. Anyone you think would be valuable. The Dominion will provide resources and protection. In return, you will help us become something better than we have been. And if it doesn't work? Marcus asked. If the experiment fails and everything falls apart, then, at least we tried, Caliph said. At least we chose to build something meaningful rather than just maintain something powerful. That has to count for something. They stood there, hands clasped, human and alien. A maintenance worker and an empress. Two people from completely different worlds who'd found common ground in the strangest way possible. And, in that moment, Marcus understood what he'd been trying to explain to Caliph all along. This was what connection felt like. This sense of being part of something larger than yourself. This willingness to take risks for each other. This commitment to building something together, even when the outcome was uncertain. You know, Marcus said, I never told you what happened with Mrs. Yamada's daughter, the girl who needed medicine. What happened? Caliph asked. I couldn't afford the medicine after I bought you food, so I went to work extra shifts. Asked around if anyone had side jobs. Turned out one of the other maintenance workers needed help with a big project and was willing to split the payment. I made enough to buy the medicine with a little left over. It took a few extra days, but the girl recovered fine. Because you found another way, Caliph said. Because you refused to accept that the initial problem was unsolvable. That's what humans do, Marcus said. We figure it out. We help each other. We find ways to make things work, even when the universe is stacked against us. Maybe that's what you need to teach the Zirathi. Not specific techniques or methods, but the basic mindset. The belief that there's always another way if you're willing to look for it. The faith that if you treat people with kindness and respect, they'll show up for you when you need them. That is what I will teach them, Caliph said. And you will help me. You and your delegation of impossible humans who give away their last meal to strangers and build communities in impossible places and somehow manage to thrive despite having no logical reason to do so. She released his hand and stepped back. I must inform the council of my decision. They will not be pleased. They will argue that I am being irrational, that I am risking everything we have built on an untested theory. They will be right. But I am going to do it anyway. Because for the first time in 10,000 years, I have hope that there might be something better than what we have. And that hope is worth any risk. When do we start? Marcus asked. Now, Caliph said. We start now. You will return to New Providence to recruit your delegation. I will begin preparing the experimental world. In 3 months, we will reconvene and begin the process of teaching an empire how to be kind. It will be difficult. It will be messy. It will probably fail in spectacular ways. But we will try. And, in trying, we will create something that has never existed before. An empire with a conscience, Marcus said. Something like that, Caliph agreed. Or perhaps something entirely new. A hybrid of Zirathi organization and human compassion. A civilization that values both power and connection. A galaxy where beings help each other not because they are compelled to, but because they have decided it is right. She touched his forehead one last time, that ceremonial gesture that had become familiar. Thank you, Marcus-chun, for helping me when I was hungry, for teaching me when I was ignorant, for showing me that there is more to existence than power and conquest. You have changed me, and, through me, you may change the galaxy. That is no small thing for a maintenance worker from New Providence. I just wanted to help, Marcus said. That's all I ever wanted. I know, Caliph said softly. That is why you succeeded where others would have failed. Because you never wanted power. You only wanted to do right by the people around you. That purity of purpose is what will save us all. If anything can. Commander Thess appeared at the entrance to the garden. Empress, the council is assembled. They await your presence. Caliph nodded. I will be there shortly. She turned back to Marcus. Go home, Marcus-chun. Say your goodbyes. Recruit your team. And prepare yourself for the most important project in human history. We are going to teach an empire to be human. We are going to prove that kindness is stronger than conquest. We are going to show the galaxy that there is another way. And if we fail? Marcus asked one more time. Then, we fail together, Caliph said. As friends. And that will have to be enough. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the surface of Thales 4, the experimental world that Caliph had chosen for her grand project. Behind him were 20 humans, carefully selected for their expertise and their understanding of what made communities work. Ahead of him were 5,000 Zirathi, volunteers who had agreed to try living according to human principles. They looked skeptical and uncertain, and Marcus couldn't blame them. What he was asking them to do went against everything they'd been taught. Caliph stood beside him, no longer wearing her crown or her ceremonial robes. She'd chosen to participate in the experiment as an equal, not as an empress. It was a symbolic gesture, but symbols mattered, especially when you were trying to prove that hierarchy wasn't the only way to organize a society. Well, Marcus said quietly, "Here we go? Think this is going to work?" "I have no idea," Caliph said. "But I have learned something from you humans. Success is not determined by certainty of outcome. It is determined by willingness to try. So we will try. And whatever happens, we will face it together." Together, Marcus agreed. "I like that word. I think it might be the most important word in any language." He stepped forward to address the assembled Zirathi. "Hello," he said. "My name is Marcus Chun. I'm a maintenance worker from a colony called New Providence. I'm nobody special. I'm not a leader or a scholar or anyone important. But I know something that might be worth sharing. I know how to help people. I know how to build community. And I know that when people care about each other, when they show up for each other, when they treat each other with kindness and respect, amazing things become possible." He looked out at the sea of golden eyes, all watching him. "I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be hard. You're going to have to unlearn things you've believed your whole lives. You're going to have to trust people who have no formal power over you. You're going to have to help others without calculating what you'll get in return. It's going to feel strange and uncomfortable and wrong. But I'm asking you to try. Just try. Give it a chance. See what happens when you build a community based on mutual care instead of hierarchical control." One of the Zirathi stepped forward. She was older, her skin patterns faded with age. "What if we try and fail? What if this experiment proves that hierarchy is necessary? Then we'll learn something valuable," Marcus said. "Then we'll know. But I don't think we're going to fail. I think you're going to discover something that your species has been missing for 12,000 years. I think you're going to learn what it feels like to be part of something. And once you feel that, once you understand what connection really means, you're never going to want to go back to being alone." He glanced at Caliph, who nodded encouragingly. "So let's start small. Let's start with the simplest thing. For the next week, I want each of you to do one kind thing for someone else. Not because you're ordered to. Not because you expect something in return. Just because you can. Help a neighbor. Share your food. Listen to someone who needs to talk. Do one small act of kindness, and see how it feels. That's all I'm asking. Just try." The Zirathi looked at each other uncertainly. But, slowly, one by one, they nodded. They would try. It was a beginning. Small, uncertain, fragile. But it was something. And sometimes, something was enough to change everything. As the crowd dispersed, Caliph turned to Marcus. "Do you think they will do it? Will they really try to be kind?" "Some will," Marcus said. "Some won't. But enough will. That's how change happens. Not all at once, not everyone together. But, slowly, person by person, choice by choice. One act of kindness leading to another. One moment of connection building into something larger. It's going to take time. It's going to be messy. But it's going to work. I believe that." "You believe with no evidence," Caliph said. "You have faith in an outcome you cannot predict. This is the most human thing about you, Marcus Chun. This irrational optimism. This belief that things can get better if people just try. Is it irrational?" Marcus asked. "Or is it the only rational response to a universe that needs changing? The Zirathi way, the way of power and conquest, that's produced 12,000 years of stability. But also 12,000 years of loneliness. 12,000 years of fear. 12,000 years of hierarchy and control. Maybe it's time to try something different. Maybe it's time to build a galaxy where beings help each other, where kindness matters, where connection is valued as much as power. That is the dream," Caliph said. "Whether it is possible remains to be seen." "Then, let's see," Marcus said. "Let's do this experiment. Let's teach these 5,000 Zirathi how to be kind. And if it works, we'll teach 5,000 more. And then 50,000. And then 5 million. We'll keep going until the whole galaxy understands that there's another way. That power isn't everything. That connection matters. That helping strangers is what makes civilization worth having. He looked up at the sky, at the stars that held 12,000 worlds. We're going to change the galaxy, Caliph. We're going to prove that humanity's way works. Not because we're strong or special or chosen, but because we understand something fundamental that other species have forgotten. We understand that we're all in this together. And when you're all in it together, when you help each other and care about each other and build communities based on trust, anything becomes possible. Even teaching an empire to be kind, Caliph said. Even that, Marcus agreed. They stood together, looking out at the experimental colony. At 5,000 Zirathi, who were about to learn what it meant to help without expecting anything in return. At the beginning of something that could change everything or fail spectacularly. At the point where human idealism met Zirathi pragmatism and created something entirely new. And, in that moment, Marcus Chin understood what he'd learned over the past months. Change didn't come from grand gestures or perfect plans. It came from small acts of kindness repeated over and over until they became the foundation of something larger. It came from helping strangers, from showing up for people, from treating others with dignity and respect even when you gained nothing from it. It came from believing that things could be better and then working to make them better, one choice at a time. He'd given his last meal to a starving woman in an alley. That was all. One simple act of kindness. But that act had echoed across the stars, had brought an empress to her knees, had started a chain of events that might reshape galactic civilization. Because kindness always echoed, always rippled outward, always changed things in ways you couldn't predict. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those changes made the galaxy a better place. A place where beings helped each other, where connection mattered more than conquest, where an empire could learn to be kind. That was the dream. That was the hope. That was what Marcus Chun and Caliph Voss were going to build together, one small act of kindness at a time. Because that was what humans did. They helped. They cared. They showed up for each other. And, in doing so, they proved that power wasn't everything. That kindness could be stronger than conquest. That the smallest acts of humanity could echo across the stars. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to change everything.